I'm Mehta, and we have two awesome guests that are joining us. Our conversation today is going to be about the myriad of options available for low vision aids to actually help our patients navigate their world. So we have Mitul and Rebecca. If you guys could both introduce yourself, that'd be excellent.
Becky, please.
Okay. I go by Becky most of the time, but Rebecca's fine too. I've been a low vision optometrist for over 20 years. I don't even know if we're getting to the next 25, but really focused on visually impaired patients and just their, being left out of society, being able to participate. And so, and that's always been a passion of mine. I more recently joined industry, and I'm the vice president of medical and clinical affairs for Samsara Vision, which does the implantable telescope. But I've done quite a bit of research in inherited retinal diseases as well in the last 10 years around helping with endpoint design for visually impaired patients who are in these, gene therapies and so on. And it's hard to measure low vision and vision. So that's kind of my background.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Mitul Mehta. I'm a retina specialist at University of California, Irvine, the Gavin Herbert Eye Institute. I'm the head of the Retina Fellowship, and I started this company called Idaptic, which makes computerized augmented reality glasses using AI to help people see better.
That's super cool. So we're going to learn about the whole spectrum, starting from the patients in your clinic, and they have either central or peripheral vision will decline. Let's start with just an overview of some of the more traditional approaches that patients can utilize.
Yeah, I think when you think about, let's say we just take macular degeneration patients and, because that's central vision loss, we're very familiar with it. If you start mixing other diseases like, let's say, RP, retinitis pigmentosa, with peripheral field loss, it just takes a little different approach. So if we kind of keep it around macular degeneration, I think that'll be a little bit easier. From a low vision perspective, we can help patients who have really early loss, maybe even just like bilateral metamorphopsia, early relative scotomas and such, so they may be in the intermediate AMD stage or so, but they're having some loss of contrast sensitivity. Some of those more mild things where they start to complain about difficulty with reading and difficulty with maybe seeing faces or food in dim light. Those are kind of some of the early things that low vision docs can help with. And that might be with really specific lighting recommendations. Lamps make a big difference where they're placed, and often our older patients, they really are being energy conscious and they turn lights off and such in their home. It's like the worst thing for fall risk, even for those earlier stage AMD patients. And then there's, hand magnifiers that can be easily adopted and taught. There are higher rating ads that can be used. So some just basic early intervention that does take a lot of complex optics, not a lot of expense, but can mean a big deal to reassuring the patient that, hey, this is a spectrum. And if you do get worse, which they likely will, but if they do in some way, there's help for them, and not to be too discouraged and despairing. Because I think you guys probably hear that, Mithil. I think you've described patient's perspective of like there's no hope of anything. And so I'll turn it over to you to kind of talk about your kind of early intervention on patients. And then we can talk more about like severe or more moderate stage where maybe certain other devices are really necessary.
Yeah. And Mitul, we're very excited to hear about your innovation. Could you tell us the story about how this has come about and what you guys have designed?
Yeah, so back when I was a fellow many, many years ago in New York, there was a company called eSight that had made these virtual reality glasses. They weren't really glasses. They were basically a whole headset over your whole face to help patients with any retinal disease see better by just offering magnification. But as a fellow, I saw that most of the patients, the problem was central vision. It wasn't the peripheral vision. There was a lot of patients with macular scars, diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, and for them, they couldn't use those devices to function in the world. They could use it to sit down, but TV screens and computer monitors started getting very cheap. And it got to the point where you could get a 40-inch like computer monitor for a few $100s. And so those were much better than virtual reality devices, because if you're going to be sitting down one place, why not just have a bigger screen? Why have something on your face at all? And so I called the company to give them some advice. Because my background is, before I went to medical school, I went to MIT and to study electrical engineering. And so I have a good understanding of the engineering approaches and stuff, as well as being a retina specialist. And so I called them to offer them free advice to make a better device. And they weren't interested in listening to me. So I said, fine, whatever. I finished my retina fellowship, went about my business. And then I joined UC Irvine on faculty. And there's an entrepreneurship association where we're at in Orange County called Octane, where these are the people who funded LASIK and Intralace and all of those companies. They're based here in Orange County. And so they have this entrepreneurship kind of thing. And I was invited to be a KOL at one of the events, and they had a networking event where companies that were starting companies were looking for medical advisors. And so people were pitching me ideas for their companies and seeing if I would be interested in being an advisor. And then this guy, Jay Cormier, came up with this idea of augmented versus virtual reality. And the advantage of augmented reality is you can see around the glasses. So this is our newest device. It is officially coming out next month. So they look just like sunglasses, a little bit bigger, but not too much. But with these glasses, I'm able to get somebody who's 2400 to read J1 Plus. And so people who are legally blind are able to read, and they can walk around and go to the grocery store, and it automatically focuses at different distances and zooms in different distances. Our very first prototype, Becky here actually designed my clinical trial for that, because, what people don't know is that she was actually my first low vision optometrist, and she set up the low vision optometry system here at UC Irvine. And what she did, which was really innovative in my opinion, was she brought in an occupational therapist to actually go to people's homes and help them set up the space that they live in and they work in to maximize the environment. Just like she was talking about lighting, things that Nalima, who's our occupational therapist, can do. When she goes to their homes, she can see what the lighting is in different situations and what it is that people are doing and what they actually want to do, and help them optimize the space that they live in to make it better. And this is all paid for by Medicare. This is covered by insurance.
That's great.
And having that setup is I think, vitally important for some of our more severe vision loss patients, especially ones with peripheral vision loss, as well as central loss. You're talking about your RP, your Stargardts, your glaucoma patients with diabetes, NVG patients. These patients, they're in a pretty bad situation, but oftentimes their Snellen visual acuity is not that bad because they have, on black on white, high contrast environments, they're able to make out individual letters. But being able to make out an individual letter is not reading, right? You read a whole word at a time. So one thing Becky did with the trial was she didn't check the vision by reading one letter at a time. She had them read a whole word. And so she developed her own vision test. And it wasn't Snellen visual acuity. It was, what'd you call it? MK? Mehta Kammer? MK Read, yeah. The Mehta Kammer reading test was the name of this test. And basically, it was so you could read long lines of text as opposed to just one word at a time. To read fluently, you really need to read the whole line kind of at a time. And be able to do that with our first prototype that we developed was important because that was a functional endpoint that we wanted to look at.
Mitul, I could just add in that. So the MN read is what we use, which is out there as an endpoint in other studies now and used. So that you were exactly right. It was like timed, and we found that patients, of course, could read faster, and they weren't able to do it at all before, or maybe with really large print. And then they could reduce the size of that print. And no one wants to read these huge words across a screen. That's just really slow. The other thing we did though is we created or we modified a test where we took activities of daily life. So we took a distance task, which was looking at signs like grocery store signs, and then an intermediate, which was cans on a shelf in a grocery store. And then we took a bill that was up close. And those are what we actually modified. And I might have called it something else, but that was a neat one because it showed that people couldn't do most of those tests at all, no matter what device they were using. And then they could with the device. And I think the really neat thing about the Adaptic device and why I'm such a fan is because you can do multiple tasks at different distances. So you could adjust it and it would autofocus for what you're looking at. And that's one device to do it all. And it doesn't look that funny. As Mitul was saying, some of these devices, they really cosmetically don't look great, and patients don't enjoy that,
Yeah.
So in
That's interesting.
traditional,
Could you describe a little bit about what is exactly it's doing? Is it zooming in and contrast enhancing, or does it read to you? Because I've heard of that approach where it's describing scenes as an aid. So are you using both of those strategies, or which one?
Yeah, it can do all of that. The one advantage of Adaptic versus things like the Mehta glasses. The Mehta glasses are nice because they're glasses that look like, these clunky, nerdy style, big frame glasses, but there's no display on them. So they can't help you see better, but they can read it for you. But the Adaptive glasses can read it for you as well as help you see it and read it for yourself. And by using the AI, it can describe context of what it is you're looking at and give you as in-depth of a description as you want. It'll uses these large language model AI systems to help kind of these people who have severe vision losses or even, holes in their vision be able to see better. So we have a bunch of patients who have geographic atrophy that's multifocal. And so they have central loss, but also around the central area, there's these little islands of vision they have. But there's also islands of no vision they have. And so it's hard for them to find things that are small. One of my patients can never find his AirPods, and he puts them down somewhere and he can't see them anymore. So what he does is he takes the glasses and he clicks the button to take the screen of the shot of the area and says, "Where are my AirPods?" And it'll describe what it is that's in front of him and where each of them are in relation to those things so that he can find it. And he finds that very useful, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. Is this something you help us like the battery life on these? Or sort of the care that you need to use them on a daily basis?
Yeah. So on a regular basis, like if it's powered by a cell phone that we provide to the user, so it's not actually a cell phone, it's actually a computer you hold in your hand or you put in your pocket. And that phone has a battery life of about 3 hours. Now we have adapters that can extend that up to 10 hours if you want. But most people will use the 3 hours and they'll charge it when they're not using it because it's not something that people are typically having to use all the time unless they're using it for work, in which case, then yeah, then they'll use the adapter to give the 10 hours of use.
One of the things that I liked about iDaptic and still like is that it sits up a little bit. So even though they look like sunglasses, it's perched a little bit because of nose pads. And then there's a clear or half clear, like you can't see on these. Yeah. But on that bottom half, it's actually less tinted. So it's slightly tinted, but you can actually see through the bottom of them. And then you can actually look down alone. So, with patients with fall risk, I said, be careful. This is not like automatically you can walk around in these, but of any of them that are out there, I would say that this one is a better. And especially if you're working with an occupational therapist who can work particularly with that patient. I've seen patients where they've used it in grocery stores so they can still see where they're walking, they can push in the cart, but they can still see what they're looking at in these kind of magnified view that kind of presents on the screen. And, that is the difference. I think traditional low vision devices, my background is actually optical engineering. So I'm a big nerd about optics and devices. And I'm always concerned with both cosmetic, how they look for patients, and then also the cost, because those are just barriers to people adopting these. So traditional kind of optical devices, there's lots of great things. Like if you go to a low vision conference, there are booths with all sorts of gadgets and so on. But they are typically aimed for like one distance and one device, telescopes for long distance, something for up close, or multiple things for different things. If you're going to do spot reading versus long term, I want to read my novel, you know, those are all kind of different depending on the field of view. And again, the expense. Telescopes in the glasses are very expensive. They're at least $1,500. And that's probably the cheapest I've seen someone mark them up. But they're fancy and exciting, and they're kind of like what you would use in surgical scopes. They're that kind of technology, but they look funny, often. So I think when you have a device that can do multiple things in one, and if insurance can pay any part of that, that's really a big benefit. So I think that's kind of where the Idaptic really kind of fits in, is able to really help you with all distances. One area that's really lost in low vision, is really hard for us, is intermediate. So being able to have something at arm's length. So this is like your musicians who want to see their music. It's your folks who are even working on an iPad a little bit, even seeing table food when you go to a restaurant. A lot of people avoid going out because they don't want to spill their food or be embarrassed and stuff. So there's a lot of consequences of that. So intermediate's huge, and very few optical devices can meet that. You have to have specialized telescopes that have a reading cap, and you have to know optics. And there's not that many low vision providers who are really comfortable with all of that math. And not that it's just complex. It takes more time, and it's usually not a big lucrative field for low vision doctors. They just don't make a lot of money doing this. And so now, if you're having the optical devices yourself, you're kind of tempted to jack up the prices, because that's how I'm going to make up the money for all the time I'm going to spend. And Medicare does pay for the time of evaluation, but still it's within reason. And often low vision docs will spend like 2 hours. That's not getting compensated, right? So there's this rub out there in society where we just don't have enough low vision optometrists. There's more low vision occupational therapists now, which is awesome because Medicare does cover, but knowing how to work together, the optometrist and the OT, it's a beautiful thing when it happens. And I've been an advocate for years of that, but often the optometrists don't know how to work with the OTs. So there's all these barriers to practicing low vision too.
And so, just kind of to wrap up the topic, how do you get your hand on?
Yeah, so there's no FDA regulation on these glasses. As far as the FDA is concerned, these are video game glasses because the actual hardware is a video game platform, and we just have software that modifies it. And so what ends up happening is that you have to go to somebody who sells the glasses, and oftentimes it is retina specialists or multi-specialty groups that have optical in-house. That tends to be the ones that tend to sell the glasses. And so you refer the patients to one of them, and you say, call this number and ask about the didactic classes. And usually the places are set up to understand that question. And then they make an appointment and they go and they get checked out and they see if they like the classes. Subscription for the AI as well. So the glasses have a fixed cost. They'll
Mhm.
work optically to be able to help you. But to use the AI, there's a subscription fee because we have to pay for the AI service and Wi-Fi and 5G. So basically, this is just a screenshot showing examples of people who actually use the glasses on a daily basis. And you can see at the top right here, this is one of our patients who actually got permission by the Wynn Casino to wear the glasses during the World Poker Tour. And he's a legally blind person. He's 2,400, and he's able to use the glasses to play poker. And he's actually won some tournaments, and he got special permission to be able to do this. A lot of patients use it at work. Some people just use it for reading or at home to watch their kids or grandkids play sports. And one of these is a nurse. She uses it on the job. And then we have the virtual assistant. This is Ivy. Ivy, you can see, she can describe things to you. She can explain what it is you're looking at, how to find what it is you're looking at. And because she's AI powered, she can actually answer questions that are at the next level. So I have one patient who his wife became disabled, and he's got 2,200 vision in both eyes from macular degeneration. And he never cooked in his life, but now he has to because his wife is disabled. So he goes to the fridge, opens a fridge, and he takes a screenshot and he says, "What can I make and how do I make it?" And it says, "It looks like these are the ingredients you have in your fridge. If you have this, this, and this, you can make X, Y, Z." And then he'll say, "Okay, well, tell me how to make, X." And it'll describe the recipe for making whatever scrambled eggs or whatever it is he wants to make out of the things he has, and what to order if it doesn't necessarily see that ingredient there. And it's pretty
That's like the
wild
best use
how
of
it does.
AI I've ever heard.
Yeah,
There's so much
it's
like AI
amazing.
slop out there, but this is exactly what we should be using it for.
Yeah, well, when he told me about that, I didn't even realize that the device could do that. Like my jaw hit the floor. I was like, "What?" That wasn't the
Cool.
plan. The plan was like, where are the eggs? And it could tell you where the eggs are. But what it is that you have 3 eggs. You can make a casserole with this, this, and this. I'm like, oh, okay. That was,
So is it running like ChatGPT 5 in the background, or do you have what's your base code?
yeah, it's a modified version of ChatGPT for that one. And the next one is using a different AI model to be released later. We'll find out about this in March. And this is a truly agentic AI. So kind of like Jarvis from Iron Man, you can just ask her. This one is she's going to be able to. She has a different name. It'll come out soon, but she'll be able to tell you exactly not what it is you want to do, but she'll actually be able to do those things for you. You'll say, "I can't see that well," and then she'll say, "Is it too dark, or do you need to increase the brightness or increase the magnification?" Or just if you say it's too dark, she'll just increase the brightness on the screen. She'll say, "I can't make that out." She'll increase the magnification and the contrast for you. She'll know what it is that you need based on what you did before and how to make an object more visible to the patient. So this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in the visual world. It's been a long
Yeah.
time getting to here, but we got there.
Huge congratulations to your team. And I really hope so many patients get access to this. So we'd like to change course a little bit. There's a whole nother world out there of devices to help patients that they could be surgically implanted. And do you want to share a little bit about your journey and Samsara's journey with the implantable telescope?
Yeah, sure. So back, gosh, probably 12 to 13 years ago or so, I'm a terrible historian, but that feels about right. And the first generation implantable telescope came into my world, and I was head of low vision for the College of Optometry locally here in Southern California. And they approached, and one of the UCI surgeons was doing it, actually, a couple of them. And I was like, okay, let me find out more what was going on. And I think that was when it was commercially available. I don't think it was in study anymore. And we had our first patient. They actually invited me into the surgery. And as an optometrist, I hadn't been very surgical, and so that was a whole thing. It was wonderful. And we worked with that patient and 2, 3 more patients after that. And it's a really neat device. And it's very similar to the one that I'm going to talk about today, which is a newly designed or redesigned version of it. But essentially, the optics are the same. And it only goes in one eye. So during cataract surgery, instead of putting an IOL in the capsular bag, you'd put the IMT in. It's pretty thick. It's about 4 or 5 IOLs thick. Once it's in the eye, it is two lenses separated by air. So it's actually fairly light considering what it could be. So it's similar to a natural human lens, but of course thicker and heavier than an IOL would be. But it sits within the capsular bag and it basically magnifies or enhances everything in that. So you're really doing this monovision and kind of a kicked up monovision version. And it's a fixed magnification though. So that's kind of the drawback from the other devices where you'd say, okay, I need more magnification or I need less, depending on the situation. It's a fixed magnification text. Back then, I think there was two versions of it, one that was a little lower, but they found the higher one was just more effective. And it gets about 3 to 4 lines of acuity gain on average, which is great when you're talking about like a pharmaceutical type of approach or something. The bar in a clinical trial is always 3 lines. So that's very exciting. And many patients get more than that because maybe they had a dense cataract or they just really weren't using their vision. So they gain just by fixating and being able to hold steady fixation with the device. And basically the rehabilitation, which back in the day was either optometrists or other therapists, and now it's mostly occupational therapists combined with optometrists who are doing more of the prescribing. It's one size fits all. So you really need glasses to correct you for all distances. So just like you had, we're talking about the benefit of Idaptic where you could use one device for all different distances. You can actually do that too, even though it's an optical device, and you do it with glasses correction. So distance, just like you were, a mild myope, you wear your glasses, and then same for presbyopic correction. The neat thing at near, when you do an ad, you actually get more magnification boost than you would with just regular ad because it's on top of telescope. And I won't go through optics. That's, painful when you're doing your boards, but there is this enhancement effect up at near. So we'll do up to like a +4. We don't really go real crazy with too close because the angle is a little tough to work with. It's a 20-degree field, which is limited in terms of your temporal side. So we want to make sure they're safe with mobility with a fellow eye. But that 20 degrees is pretty big for an optical device. Now, just like the wearables, you can get even more than that. So that's very cool. The implant, though, you're kind of stuck with it. So it's good and bad. Like it's good because you better make it work, So that's our rehabilitation really designed around that, picking the right patient who understands they're going to go through about 6 to 10 rehab sessions. It's not going to be easy right away. It's not going to be like their friends who woke up from cataract surgery and were like, oh, it's all bright, It is going to be a little dimmer image than a regular IOL because you're losing light transmission going through all those lenses, but you don't have cataract anymore. So sometimes that's a bit of a trade-off. So it's a really neat device. It's had success. It's had patients who haven't been successful, right? I'd probably say there's probably explant rate's pretty low. It's like only 5% or so. But I would say there's probably a greater percent, maybe about 10%, who really just kind of like, oh, it didn't really work for me. It did.
Mm.
Optically, it usually does, unless their AMD progresses from where they started. Their baseline's going to be a little different. But if you took it out, they'd be worse vision, of course. But some just, were like, I thought it'd be easier. I thought it would just be like kind of this magic, even though you told them it was going to take work. Just like monovision, it takes work to, you have to patch and work on each eye. Monovision, not so much, right? That's a little more, you pick the right patient right away and you usually are okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is really kicked up monovision. So it definitely takes more work for the patient. But it's been amazing in terms of changing folks' lives, around ADL enhancement, activities of daily life, being able to do so many different things just with kind of regular glasses. And then you can add on magnification. So let's say they start their range of acuity has to be 2160 to 2800 in both eyes. So both eyes have to be pretty impaired. This is not your 2060, 2100s who have a lot of options of devices. This is folks who are legally blind pretty much and worse. So usually those folks need like the big CCTVs, very expensive. For Mithels, they'll benefit all the way through all the ranges because you can crank up the magnification. But remember, every time you crank it up, you're going to have a smaller field of view. So for this device, it gets a patient, let's say mathematically, you just go, oh, it's at least 2 times better, maybe sometimes 3 times better because it's a 2.7x. So if someone's starting in 2800 range, they're not really visual with any devices. I don't find they're really coming to me for any devices anymore. They're really checked out. And the neat thing is this can get them to maybe 2200, 2300. And now maybe we can use another device to help them get to something. It's not getting them back to reading a book at that stage, but those patients, if they have vision loss that severe, they often have hearing other problems that come in and cognitive decline. That's a really sad state. So I think that those patients with really severe, it's not going to be the same outcome as someone who starts at the 2200 range and gets to maybe reading again at 2060 or so. But each one has its benefits. So we explain that in the pre-op assessment and such. But okay, so the top picture here is the old device where it was a larger incision. It was a rigid haptics. So it went through about 11 millimeter incision. And that was huge, So the surgical recovery time took like 6 weeks or so. We were concerned about corneal edema. Endothelial cell loss was up to 25%. Now the new one has the same optics, but it goes through an injector system. So these are foldable haptics, silicone, and they go through an injector. So it goes through about a 7 millimeter incision. So still larger than your regular phacos, but it takes about 2 to 3 sutures to close it up. And healing time's great. I mean, we'll have patients getting into rehab within 1 week post-op. So that's kind of unfounded. They're excited. The first device, it took a long time. And so they were often discouraged with the wait time and like, oh, it must be me. It's like, no, just wait for your eye. Now our endothelial cell loss, it's approved in Europe. So it's been, I think we've had over 400 cases in Europe. And our ECD loss there is about 8 to 10%. So closer to standard cataract surgery. So much better for these older patients. We're in clinical trial in the US for this device. The problem is you have to find patients who are at the right range of acuity. So end stage AMD, they're dry or wet, but inactive wet, but you still have to have a cataract. And everybody's had cataract surgery, especially in California, but across the US
Mhm.
really early. I think our average patient is about 75. And so most have had IOLs. So they're not eligible even if they really want it. So that's kind of the disappointment of the process. So we are actually working on a pseudophakic trial submission. I'm actually working on that today when I'm supposed to be off a little bit, but we really want to put together a good package. So we have a pseudophakic trial in Europe going on. It just started enrolling in 3 different countries. So in the US, we're working on having a kind of a parallel study with pseudophakic where we do more of a lens exchange, take the IOL optic out and place the haptics in the sulcus. So a little different. Take it slowly and, work with the FDA on getting a good trial going. But that should really open up accessibility quite a bit for patients.
Okay. That's very interesting. So you'd have to explant the old eyeball. You don't piggyback it or something like that.
Right. In the US, I would say that it's a little bit different. Europe, they are doing a two approach where it's a piggyback approach or it's a lens exchange. And so they have 2 different arms. But in US, usually piggyback is a little discouraged by the FDA agencies. So it doesn't mean we won't go that approach at some point or try, but I think the IOL one is the one we're going to, or the cutting the optic is the one we're going to do for now. And so that requires a surgeon that has a little more skill with lens exchange and such.
And are you guys currently still enrolling? Can you refer patients to the study now?
Yeah, the phakic study is enrolling. We have 15 sites or so that are pretty active across the U.S. We've got 2 in Southern California. One's at Loma Linda University. One is at a private practice, Eye Physicians of Long Beach with Carlos Martinez. Excellent surgeon. Both surgeons are excellent, but they've both done the first generation implant. And if they can do that, they can do anything. And then the second one, they've had a few patients each, which is great. And I have good rehab sources here. But there are all across the states, and our study will pay everything for pretty much for the patient in terms of the expenses and the device. There's no billing of insurance right now, although the first generation device was approved by Medicare, and it did reimburse about $16,000 to $20,000 for the device. So amazing what Medicare will pay when it's inside the eye, but
Great.
that's
Exactly.
another
It's a
discussion on low
different
vision.
problem. It's one of these things where it depends on the patient, right? So there are patients with kind of more end stage disease and dealing with technology might be difficult for them. Those patients might be better with an implantable device. And patients with kind of a more earlier loss are still kind of motivated to put the work in to learn a new technology, even if they're older. I think my oldest patient who uses Idaptic is 99 years old. So they're able to figure it out. It's a lot of it is automatic function. We have the auto zoom function, like Becky was mentioning earlier about people with grocery stores. It's zoomed out all the time while you're walking around, and it just waits until it identifies text. Then it enlarges it to the size that you chose. So that'll create the zoom. So there's no zoom while you're in motion, but when you stop and stay on one thing, then it'll zoom in. And so that's
Could
a
you
good
use
feature
them
for going
in
around.
together? Could you have an IMT in an eye and then also using your Idaptic as part of that world?
Yes. So that's the thing about getting patients this big boost initially, and then what can they do with other devices? There's a few patients, right? The ones who are start at 2160 with the IMT, they can often get to reading print size, but again, lighting, boldness, all that kind of stuff. And just with glasses and maybe one simple hand magnifier, that's ooh, these patients sometimes are going back to work. They're not driving. We don't promise any driving because of that field of view restriction. But other ones, they need a little bit more. What happens is they get excited about what they can do. Oh, I can see my kids' faces. I can go to my grandkids' soccer games, And then they're not greedy, but I want to do this now. I want to go back to, putting my model airplanes together, really fine detail. I want to do my woodworking. Okay, let's find a way. And that's when occupational therapists are awesome because they're so creative. And so once they're dealing with whatever devices, they're like, oh, I think we can do it this way or that way. So I've often thought about layering these two together. We did refer a patient not too long ago where she was making such good gains and then she wanted even more. And we're like, oh, this could be a really good thing. She has to have the money, right, to get the device. That's the thing. I mean, we still need ways to find patients who can't afford it but could get the amazing benefit of Idaptic. That would be like, our ideal world. And maybe there are some foundations that I don't even know about that could supplement. Anyway, yeah, I think they can definitely work together. Again, I have to check on this patient, see if she did take it to that level, because that would be a really neat case study that I think we could, write up.
Yeah.
But layering is very possible for sure.
One of the nice things is that in most states, there's a Department of Rehab that wants to keep people working, and they'll often pay for the whole device completely, which is nice. California is one of those places where it will. So, if you're willing to fill out the paperwork, and you are, able to work, and because of the device, the government wants you to work, right? Because they'll make it up in taxes the first year.
Yeah. 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 It's, as a retina surgeon, we spend our whole careers fighting the attrition of vision loss. So it's really lovely to learn about ways that you can give something back to somebody. And we've reached a point in technology at this time that it's not how we expected it, right? It's not stem cells, it's not regeneration of the retina, but we have all these tools, these AI tools and other implantable devices to do it in a more innovative and different manner. So yeah, I really appreciated learning from both of you. Any final thoughts to share? This has been a really interesting discussion.
I think, if I could share just with general about low vision, we talked about all these kind of different stages, a little bit about visual impairment, and there are a lot of amazing devices. You don't have to know everything that's out there. I think finding good partners who can help know all of those current things and refer them and so on, that is key. So finding your resources. And sometimes in your community, there may not be somebody. So like Mithil said, just do your best to provide a little bit. I've had some of my clinical sites say, I really believe in low vision, but the time and so on, but they just allocate like one half day a month to low vision and they pay for, low vision provider just to come into their practice for half a day, just as a service, not as a revenue generator. And I think, that is the continuum of care of helping patients when you can't medically do anything else. They're stable. You're happy about that stability. I mean, these complement inhibitors are great, but now there's more. Like they still want to be able to read. I guess I'm asking everyone to push themselves to go a little outside of that just regular daily life, amazing stuff that you're doing, and think about how can I actually help extend that further so someone might be able to read again and do more than just stop the disease.
Exactly. Yeah, and I agree entirely with Becky's whole mindset. You have to actually talk to your patient, ask them, "Hey, how are you doing? What is it you want to do that you can't do that you used to be able to do?" So, what their biggest concern is being able to watch the game. There's things we could do to help them watch the game. And oftentimes the cost might sound like a lot up front, but you have to realize it's a benefit they have for years afterwards. And so if you amortize that over the course of, 2, 3 years, spending, $4,000 for a device is suddenly okay. It's, ends up being like $200 a month over the course of 4 years or 2 years that you're using the device. And that can work out pretty well for you. At the same time, you're able to do the things you want to do. And now your kids or your grandkids don't have to help you do simple things like cook for yourself.
Yeah. Thanks for the uplifting conversation. And thanks for spending this Sunday with me talking about these amazing innovations.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Fish.